feel like Peter is so miserable because of so much he doesn't say. Like,
let's get into it. Welcome back to Straight Up Book Club. Today we are talking about Sally Rooney's Intermezzo, and we have different book covers. Is this based in the country? We're not sure. I thought it was hardcover and paperback, and that was the difference, but it doesn't seem like it.
Mine's a little fuzzy. I clearly have a filter on my Zoom. Everybody knows now. I like your cover better. I like the yellow and the like beige. I just like it better. I like mine too, but yeah, there's something about yours that just feels very trendy.
Interesting. I like yours better because I really like that shade of blue.
Interesting. We'll do a little swapsies after. I'll send you mine, you send me yours.
Yeah.
And you'll see everything that I highlighted.
It sounds great. I actually didn't highlight at all this time. I need to do that more. It just makes it so much more scannable when I'm going back and reading. But in the moment, I just get so lazy with highlighting.
It depends on where I am. Like, if I'm reading in the subway, like, the highlighting's not happening. I already have, like, a coffee in one hand and a book in the other. So sometimes I'll, like, dog ear. I'm going to go to book jail for this. I, like, dog ear the page, and then I'll come back to it and then highlight. I'm a fan of loving my book in a very physical way. That sounds weird. But you know what I mean? Like dog-earing it, highlights, notes. Like, I've always been like that, and I'm not going to stop, so.
Yeah. I remember, like, growing up, it was a whole thing, like, don't crack the spine. Like, the spine needs to be in perfect condition. I'm like, well, no.
How can you read it?
Care. Especially,
How
like,
can
the
you
thicker
read it?
books. Yeah.
You gotta go kirk. Like, otherwise you're reading like this. Like, I don't know. Like, more power to you if you can not crack the spine while you're reading a book, but that's
apparently the right way to do it is to, like, hold it out. Like, so you're kind of curling the back and front pages so that, let me just grab this paperback on my desk right here.
Okay, but, like, I'm lost in another world when I'm reading a book. Like, I'm not cognizant of how I'm holding it.
This is the way.
Who reads like that? Show me a person who reads like that.
Yeah.
If there's someone out there who reads like that, I want to interview them. Okay, I've got a weird filter going on. I gotta get rid of this on the next one, but my hand's, like, disappearing. It's a Halloween episode. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I don't like that. That's my hot take for today. And I would like to talk to someone who reads like that and just see if they're a psychopath. No, I'm kidding.
Seriously. This is a whole, like, you remember that I think it's the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where he's like, I think it's Seinfeld, actually, where it's like, you gotta respect the wood. Like,
it's Curb Your Enthusiasm, but it's the episode when it's the Seinfeld reunion, so it's all the Seinfeld characters.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just gonna be talking about tangents. Okay, so we're talking about part 1 today. So before we get into it, Heather, how's your week?
My week was non-eventful. I've been sick for like 2 weeks now.
Oh no.
And I'm just getting over it. Yeah, it's been brutal. So 2 weeks just getting over it. I had to get, like, antibiotics because I think it was, like, an infection. Starting to feel better. I did run a half marathon on Sunday, which probably wasn't a good idea considering how sick I was, and I think I made myself worse. But on a positive note, I did vote this week, so
nice.
That's exciting. Any Americans out there, at home or abroad, remember to vote.
Yes. It's coming up.
That's it. That's my life.
I was confused there for a second. I was like, there's an election in Canada that I'm not aware of. I'm like, oh wait, I always forget.
I said that the other day. My friend was like, it was like an Instagram conversation, and they were like, "Oh, are you bilingual?" And they listened to this, by the way. So hi, CJ. They were like, "Are you bilingual?" And I'm like, "What does that have to do with voting?" And they're like, "I meant dual citizen." I'm like, "Yeah. How do you not know that? We've been friends since we were 10." And they were like, "Well, I knew you were American. I didn't know if you, like, kept it when you became a Canadian." But anyways, I'm tangenting again. What's happening? Okay, Nat, how was your week?
It was good. We're at the new house and really just settling in. So a lot of it has just been getting deliveries and putting up furniture. And I finally have my office set up, and I'm very excited to have my own office. It's very nice. That's why the walls are so bare, and maybe you can hear an echo, but the
I'm so
growing
excited to
pains of
see these
moving in.
pictures.
Yeah.
Aww. It's exciting too, though, like making a place your own. Like that's the best part of moving is just like kind of creating this vision and then making it all come together. So I'm really excited. And Nat has great style, if you can't already tell. So her house is going to look gorgeous, and I can't wait to see everything.
Thank you. I feel like I'm like in nesting phase, just like so
Aww.
excited about curtains. I'm like, who am I?
All right, shall we talk about the book?
Let's do it. Yeah. Tell us what's happened.
All right. So, okay, this one's like a little bit hard to summarize because similar to the other books we've been reading, like Long Island Compromise and Blue Sisters, this one is very much where like the event happened before the book starts. So in this one, it's a father who dies. And then we're kind of getting like the characters reeling in the aftermath. And in this situation, it's two brothers, which is a really nice contrast to the four sisters that we read a couple books ago. So for the two brothers, we have Peter and Ivan. There's a 10-year age gap. Which is quite substantial. And Peter is the older one. He's a lawyer. He's wealthy. He has this like kind of girlfriend named Naomi who seems to be like, maybe she works, I think she's in school, but then she also has like an OnlyFans account or something to that nature. And then he also has this like platonic but also love affair with his ex-girlfriend Sylvia. And the reason why they kind of unraveled as a couple is because she was in some sort of accident. Do you know if it was a car accident? Or
Yeah,
did they
I think
specify?
so.
It was a car accident.
But it wasn't like they didn't go into that in too much detail. It was a little bit sort of like as an aside almost.
The car accident ended up disabling her in a way where she can't have sex. Or if she does, I guess it's like very, very painful. So that kind of, it didn't go into too much detail, but it sounds like maybe she ended things with Peter because of this. Like she feels like her like relationship, like that period of her life is over. But they've maintained their friendship. Sorry,
is that what happened? Because to me, I was like, I thought that it was Peter. He had this affair with Naomi, and then that's sort of what blew up their relationship. But maybe I read that differently, or like, is that what happened?
That's okay. I don't know, but I would go with what you said more because I feel like I always miss these like big picture elements. So that would make more sense.
I'm not
But
sure.
then there's also
it's
like
one of those two then.
it's interesting because they talk about Naomi like when they're together, right? Like doesn't Sylvia ask about her? But Sylvia also just seems like this very nice, sweet person who I don't know.
Yeah.
But their relationship's over and it's now this like kind of platonic one. However, like they'll sleep together, not in like a sexual way, and they'll talk and they'll, she'll ask about his family and it's like it's very sweet, and that's kind of Peter's situation. His girlfriend Naomi is also like recently been evicted from her apartment, so she's living with him now, and that's kind of like where Peter's storyline is. And then we have Ivan, the one who's 10 years younger. He's like 22. He had lived with their dad, like when their dad was diagnosed with cancer, and then when he ultimately passed away. And Ivan is a freelance data analyst, but he's also like a former competitive chess player. And he still does play chess at certain like events, but they seem to be like smaller scale community events. It's less like this larger competition. So one time when he's at this like community event where he's playing like 10 games of chess against a bunch of people in the community, he has this like liaison or whatever you call them. Her name's Margaret, and she's kind of the person who's driving him to and from the games, making sure he's set up. And when she's driving him home, they start talking, and I don't know, there's like a little bit of feelings there, I guess, and he invites her back into his rental. She stays, they have sex, and then from then they kind of establish this kind of relationship, but it's like not official or anything. She is 36, so she is like I think 14 years his senior. She's also going through a separation with her husband slash ex-husband. Like they're not actually divorced, right? But he is an alcoholic, and she's kind of severed ties with him, and it's a weird situation where like her family like sometimes takes his side in things, which is kind of interesting, and she doesn't really want a relationship, but she clearly has feelings for Ivan. And these are kind of like the two lives that are happening. One night Ivan and Peter go for dinner and they're talking about, life, and it ends with Ivan telling Peter about Margaret. And Peter doesn't like this. He doesn't like that she's so much older. He's worried about it, and Ivan kind of storms off, says like, fuck you, essentially. And he leaves, and it seems like they don't have any more contact after this point. And that's kind of where we are. Like, we do end with Ivan at his friend's house, and he's having a good time with his friends. His friends are kind of chiding him about his girlfriend, or Margaret, I guess. And most of the friends leave. He has a chess game with like one of his friends who he thinks is better than him at chess. And during that game, Ivan wins, and it's the first time he's felt like he's been good at chess in a while, like since his dad died. Like when his dad was going through chemo and dying, he says that he kind of like lost his I guess skills in that area. He beats him, he leaves, and he just feels like very, very happy and content and alive, I guess. And that's kind of where this part ends. He's not really having a relationship with his brother at the moment since that conversation, but he seems like he's pretty happy. Did I miss anything? I feel like there's so many like little side things happening, but it's a lot of just like these two brothers kind of living their lives after their father's passing.
Yeah, no, I think you got everything. And it's interesting because one of the reasons I'm excited we're talking about this book is that my reading of this was so strange in a way. Like, I feel like, and I put this in our notes, like, I feel like for the first like 2 or 3 chapters, I like didn't know what was going on. I just couldn't follow a lot of the writing. And this might just be like my own headspace. Maybe I was just like having a harder time like being focused. So I'm like really curious to know how you felt about this, because so when we're getting into specifics, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure if I like picked up on it or read it. But then there is a shift. So there was a period where I want to say towards the middle end of this first part, where suddenly, the way it was structured was a little bit different. It's a lot more in third person, a little bit less like that introspection element, so it's not like these very short staccato sentences that are like the characters had almost. So then I felt like I can follow along a little bit better and know and have a firmer grasp of what's going on. So I'm kind of curious about like, so when you're saying, a lot of this is, about the brothers sort of living their lives, what was your impression of that? Like, did you have an easy time following that? Did you, or was it sort of similar to what I experienced?
It was very similar. Those first few chapters felt very like stream of consciousness, and I was really having a hard time understanding like what was happening. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like Faulkner, like he did As I Lay Dying, and then he also did, what was that other one that was like really intensely stream of consciousness? It's escaping me. But yeah, the first few pages I was like, oh no, what have we gotten ourselves into? Like, this is really hard to follow. I'm kind of losing focus. And then I wasn't really cognizant of that shift that you're talking about. But then after a few chapters, I fell into it and I was like, okay, yeah, no, this is all making more sense. And then I was obsessed and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't put this down. And it does kind of go on and on and on in a way. There's not a lot of breaks, so you kind of get sucked into it and you're like, oh wow, 2 hours have gone by and I should probably like put this down. So yeah, it's interesting that at the beginning we both had that same reaction. I also find that Peter's moments are a little bit more like that. I'm not sure about you, but like the Peter character, and I think we start with Peter, is a little harder to like get into. It almost feels more stream of consciousness, whereas Ivan is like a little bit more clear for me.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that, because as you were saying that, is that a reflection of the characters as well? Because Peter is like, he's not in the best headspace right now, right? Like he's had these like suicidal moments, and he kind of talks about, continuing on because he wants to be there for his brother and things like that. So I wonder, what you just sparked for me is, maybe that's internal. Ivan does seem to be a little bit more clear in his life right now.
That's a good observation. I think I think you're probably right, because even though Peter's does get like a little bit more clear as it goes on, especially I find the clearest moments are when he's having conversations with Sylvia and Naomi. Those moments are a little bit easier, sorry. But then when he's on his own, his mind is like almost he's spinning and spiraling all the time. So I feel like it is harder to get into. And you're right. I feel like Ivan. It's interesting because Ivan seems to have this almost like removed view of the world, I guess. Like it's very much like he's kind of learning. The things that he knows are polite and the things that he knows to do, it's like things that he's learned over time. And he brings up the example of like the pregnant woman on the on the bus and how she wanted his seat and he was kind of upset about giving up to her. He's like, I didn't get her pregnant, like that was her choice. And he was very upset by this, and he only starts to realize that like, oh, maybe she is tired and does deserve this when he has this relationship with Margaret and he's having this sort of love affair with this woman. He's almost like experiencing more empathy for women in that moment, and it's like everything is learned. It's very like anthropological, almost like he's studying humans and learning how to be a human, but there's something very like relatable about that, I guess, and very sweet. I don't know, what did you think of Ivan as a character? Like, I'm just really obsessed with him personally.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It's very clear that he's having like a harder time in some of these like social situations, but I loved how he's really analytical about it. And to your point, he's like really trying to dissect like what it is about his approach versus other people's approach. You know, he's so like stuck on Peter being like almost blasé about like that restaurant example was so interesting, you know. That was so relatable because, you know, sometimes you're like so in your head about like, oh, like how do I send this back, it's not what I wanted, or there's a hair and then what do I do?
Or you just eat it anyways to like not have to do that.
Yeah, and he just has this like ease, and Ivan really wants to accomplish that, or you know, get to that point as well. So that was interesting. There's this element of growth for him that I really liked. You know, he's almost like looking up to Peter in these moments where he's like, oh, like, you know, he would have done this differently or he would have acted differently. And then he's trying to achieve that. I found that really interesting because I think that if we're going to talk about like objectively like good characters, I feel like Ivan might be sort of more of a good character than Peter, at least for now. And I think like the way they're portrayed is so funny because Ivan thinks these are inherently good qualities in a way, you know, and he's trying to emulate them, but they're really not. And yeah, I agree with you. I think he's a very sweet character, and not one that's like that I can correlate to anything that we've read recently.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. It's definitely like a refreshing perspective, the way that he views the world. It's, yeah, all these things. You're so right about him being like this kind of objectively good character in comparison to Peter. And he's having these realizations every time he's with him, like the tortellini thing. I'm so obsessed with that. The like, oh, I ordered the tortellini, and Ivan just being in awe of that. And like, I find myself feeling that way when I see other people do that kind of thing. Like, just being able to say what they want in situations where they feel like they might be rude, or I don't know. I thought that was interesting. But then it kind of in that same conversation with him, Peter's asking him about his financial situation, and Ivan just kind of says, oh, you know, like, I'm freelance, so, you know, the money comes but not always on time, and rent's due next week. And Peter just very nonchalantly is kind of like, oh, well, if you need some money, like, I can obviously help you out. And then Ivan's also in awe of how simple it was for Peter to offer that without making like a show of it, just kind of like an offering. And then Ivan makes this distinction about Peter's wealth and how beforehand he had seen his wealth as like a personality trait and not as something like separate from himself that he can kind of give to other people to help them out. And I just thought that was so interesting how, yeah, I do think that like from the outside, when you see some people, like, I don't know, people on Bay Street walking around and they work in finance, and you're kind of like, yeah, some people it does seem like wealth is almost a personality trait. Mm-hmm. And him having that like come to Jesus with his brother was kind of, I don't know, it's just interesting how Peter is almost being framed for us as this not whole character from Ivan's perspective, and it's only now at 22 that he's starting to see that like he is a little bit more complex.
Yeah, and I love that. And it's almost like it demonstrates that sibling dynamic again, right? Like you are in your 20s in a phase of your life where maybe you're not paying attention to those parts of another person, or maybe you're not in a space where you understand them or even want to. And partially this might be because of Margaret, right? Like he's getting to know a person who's much older than him, and so maybe he's more open to noticing and appreciating these qualities in Peter. And I really liked that dynamic of their relationship as well. Like their sort of growth is what we're witnessing here, or his at least.
Yeah, I do wonder if we'll get more of that Peter growth here. Peter, it's interesting. So another thing that I was kind of noticing in this is a lot of Sally Rooney's novels, and we've read like Normal People, Conversations with Friends. It's a lot of people dancing around what they want to say. So much of that, like, Normal People was pretty much two adolescents who didn't know how to express like their love for each other in this weird like socioeconomic like distance between the two of them. And I felt that a lot with Peter and his relationship with like Naomi and with Sylvia, but I didn't notice that so much with Ivan. Like it feels like Ivan is the only character who says what he's thinking and feeling. Like even Margaret kind of dances around things. There's one moment when Margaret is talking about like their age difference and how she's unsure, and she keeps tiptoeing around whether or not she wants to pursue this as a relationship. And Ivan's like, if you don't want to be with me, just tell me. But don't make our age the excuse. Like, just tell me that you don't want to be with me, but don't use this as the conduit for us not being together. And I thought that was interesting how blunt he is in this, and it's so different from all of her other characters. But then Peter, I feel like Peter is so miserable because of so much he doesn't say, like his relationship with Naomi and his relationship with Sylvia. Like, what do you think of his romantic relationships, and also in comparison to the romantic relationship with Ivan and Margaret? Like, I'm very curious to know what you think about all these like lovers, quarrels isn't even the right word, but relationship dynamics, I guess, is the word.
Yeah. I think for Peter and Naomi and Sylvia, I'm struggling to make sense of that. Because again, the way I read it, like he sort of blew up this relationship with Sylvia for Naomi. But then now he seems to be drawn back to Sylvia, and Naomi almost seems like an obligation in a way. Like it doesn't, like, I'm not getting the sense that he's in love with her or he like truly cares about her. It feels almost like he wants to take care of her, but because he feels this sense of obligation. And that comes up with the letter and the eviction, and then like asking her to stay with him after that and just giving her money, right? Like it seems like there's no warmth there. I don't, at least I'm not getting that. And then, with Ivan and Margaret, it's interesting because there was this moment where when they, are drawn to each other, we get a glimpse for each of them just being really shy and insecure about it, before they actually like kind of let on like, this is what I want, and, sort of go for it in that way. So that was interesting. So I feel like there's an element of like, no one really knows what they want, and they're a little bit sort of hesitant about acting on it as well. So I think we're seeing that in all of these dynamics. And, what really struck me though was like towards the end of this part, when Peter finds out about Margaret and Ivan, he's so harsh about it, right? Like he's tactless. And again, this goes back to like the social skills that Ivan thinks he has. Peter really doesn't demonstrate that here, right? But I don't really see a difference between, Ivan and Margaret versus Naomi and Peter, right? Isn't that like, that's a pretty significant age gap as well. So why is Peter on his high horse about this, about Ivan being with Margaret not being a good idea. Is it because he's the one that's older in his dynamic, I don't know. What do you think?
I do think I saw that as like the big brother trying to protect his younger brother in a way that he's not really protecting himself, if that makes sense.
I like that.
That's how I saw it. I do think that, like, I think Peter loves Ivan. I mean, they're brothers. Like, yes, there's a 10-year age gap. I have a sister who's 10 years older than me. And age gaps are big, and we've talked about this in other episodes. They're big when you're younger, but when you get older, like, the age gap doesn't feel like what it is. However, the 20 to 30 age gap is the biggest, which is what they're in right now.
Yeah.
And I think Peter's probably in his 30s, and he's realizing that, like, he wants this relationship with his brother. So I do think he's trying. Like, and Ivan notices that. He's like, I think that this is Peter trying. Him calling me, him asking me for lunch, him asking me for dinner. Like, this is him trying. Again, Peter's not someone who can come right out and be like, hey, I want to have a closer relationship with you, because we can see he dances around his feelings. So these are the things that he's doing in order to try to be that big brother, even though, like, offering him money. Based on Ivan's shock, this is not shock, but his reaction, this is the first time that Peter's ever asked him about his financial situation and the first time he's offered him money. So I do think he's trying to show up as a brother now. Maybe since their dad died too, that could be part of it. Mm-hmm. But I also think that, like, when you love people, like, you want what's best for them, even if you're not necessarily, like, taking care of yourself in the same way. So that's kind of how I saw it. Yeah. It's hard to say because that blow up kind of happened just before the end of part 1. But yeah, I'm curious to know what you think as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's very like, do as I say, not as I do.
Don't we all kind of do that? Like, even in friendships, like, I'll often give advice to friends that I'm like, this is a no-brainer. You have to do this. Whereas, like, I wouldn't give myself that same encouragement or, like, grace, or I'm not sure what the term I'm looking for is, but it's like, you do that with people that you don't know, wouldn't normally do it for yourself. I think that's just, like, a part of the human condition. Like, we always see ourselves as not as valuable as the people in our lives. I'm not saying that's always the case, but I do think, especially with siblings, when you're, like, an older sibling, I think there is that element of protection. And their dad just died. So I think Peter probably feels even more than ever that he needs to protect Ivan. I mean, Ivan did live with their dad right up until he passed. So I'm sure there's a part of Peter that feels like, well, I need to take care of him now, at least to an extent. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. Especially with their mother just sort of not being in the picture very much. She seems quite distant and not really a person that they're, comfortable, like, turning to for that protection or support in this way. I love that, though. To your point, like, you're so right. It's so much easier to see what other people are doing wrong or could be doing better, or, like, how they're handling their life, and have some sort of judgment on it and be like, here's what you should be doing. But we don't follow that stuff ourselves. It's just really easy to say when you're, like, separated from it, and easy to see in that way too.
It's true. And I'm not saying that in the way where I'm like, I don't think that Peter's necessarily right. Like, I don't see the harm in Ivan exploring this relationship with an older woman. Like, but Peter doesn't know Margaret. He doesn't know her intentions. He doesn't know her as a human. So he just sees a much older woman going through a divorce, going for his younger brother. Like, I would also have my reservations, I think, if I didn't know any better. But obviously we're getting Margaret's perspective as well, and we know that she's a good person. So I'm not saying... I think Peter needs to take the time to understand the relationship a little bit more before he casts a judgment. However, I think that judgment was cast with concern and love, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I feel like we haven't talked about Margaret too much, like, as her own character, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Like, we get a little bit of her backstory, right? Like, we know that she was in a relationship for quite a few years. She was married, and then she ended that relationship. And you said earlier, that she her husband everyone else seems to be taking his side of things, because it sounds like he was really good at hiding his alcohol, well, not his alcohol dependency, because everyone seemed to know to expect him at the bar. I think that's how it was portrayed. But yeah, I think it's alluded to that there was some abuse there as well. And I think that part of it, he was pretty good at hiding. So her family doesn't really understand why she ended things. And so she's having a harder time with, letting go of that. And he's obviously not letting go of that. But she talks about, like, finally she can be with someone who's a little weird. I think she says, like, she has that freedom to do things that make her a little bit weird. And I thought that was just such a great way of portraying this, because it sounds like, she's been so used to structure and being told, like, what's the proper way of doing things. And now she's ready to kind of branch out of that and understand who she is, and maybe she hasn't had that opportunity before. And so then maybe it's funny, because maybe this relationship with Ivan is sort of a rebound in that way, where she's just like trying to like go completely in opposition of everything that she's known so far, and with a much younger man too. But yeah, curious to know your thoughts of Margaret and her situation.
Yeah, I definitely think that Ivan is giving her the space to kind of like discover who she is, but still in kind of like this bit of a relationship, which is, I'm sure, refreshing for her, because all these moments, we don't get a lot of her ex, but it alludes to abuse, it alludes to a bit of like quite a bit of control, like him showing up to her work and trying to find where she is, and there's an element of stalking there too, and like that kind of person is the type of person who has no problem controlling you when you're in the relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure she wasn't able to explore who she really was. Like, it doesn't tell us how long they were together, but it seems like this was quite a long time, enough time for her family to kind of take him on as their own, to the extent where they're kind of taking his side in the aftermath. That to me says many years. Like, we don't know, it hasn't said, but that's kind of what I gather from this. So I feel like she's been held back for so long with her ex, and now she's kind of able to explore who she is. And she definitely seems very like shy and timid and unsure. So even in the period when she's on her own, maybe she didn't feel, the weightlessness of being able to like explore that side of her. But I love her moments with Ivan, like the day that they go to the beach and they go swimming and it's kind of cold, and they go to the like little restaurant, and Ivan mentions that he loves places like that where it's just kind of this little family-owned place that, is occupied by maybe like a couple of older couples and then one young family, and that's it, and it's on the seaside. And I don't know, there's just something so pure about their time together. And when they're talking, it's very like, well, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this? They're very cautious around each other, but in a very like loving way. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I do really like Margaret's character. I do think a part of her is worried of hurting Ivan, because she knows that they are at different points in their life. Mm-hmm. And, how sustainable is this relationship? But at the same time, Ivan's very like, can't we just, like have fun together? Like, if we have an attraction and we want to get to know each other, like, don't think that like far into the future. So I don't know. I like her. I like their relationship. And I do think that she is kind of like exploring who she is now, when she hasn't been able to do that before.
Mm-hmm. And I think that like sort of difference in viewing it, like let's have fun in the moment versus like, where is this going? I think that's also a virtue of their age difference, right? Because you're much more likely to just kind of play it by ear in that sort of age group that Ivan's in, and then later you're like, I kind of need to figure out, what this means. Hey, should we call it there?
Yeah, that's perfect. Sweet.
Yeah. So join us next time, and we'll read the second and third parts of this book. I think, there's 3 parts. So, Yeah, let's get on that next half. Let's see what happens with Ivan and Margaret. Are they going to stay together? Are Peter and Ivan going to work on their relationship? And what's happening with Peter and Sylvia and Naomi? Will Naomi make it back into her apartment that she was evicted from?
I'm predicting a lot of heartbreak. I feel like Sally Rooney is always like a little on the sad side. I'm trying to remember the endings of everything else, but there's going to be some conflict for sure. I'm excited.
Me too. Okay, join us next time.
See you at book club.
Bye.
Bye.